Hello, Alexandra.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great. So we're going to have about 45 minutes to 1 hour together.
Yes.
And first question, it's about introducing yourself, but I will frame it this way. So you have been an activist. You have been a chief sustainability officer in a big corporation, so L'Oréal Group, and now head of WWF France. And I want to understand this experience. How did you get to work in that field? And how are you looking at the best way to make an impact? What drives you?
So first, thank you very much for having me. I think, I have to take it a little bit. I have to take a little bit of time to explain, because I think everybody has a very personal story about engagement, commitment, the way you want to intervene or to have an impact on society. So I was born in Austria, and I grew up in Austria during our work on our history and collective responsibility and individual responsibility during the Second World War and the Shoah. And that is something that was really very much, I think, determining my vision on what is my role in society, what is my responsibility in society, who I want to be and how I want to behave also in difficult situations. Because at that time, the parents and grandparents said, oh, you cannot judge because you haven't been there, was an authoritarian regime, people risked their life if they would have said something and so on. So I think in very young age, at around 14, 15, my question turned really around the issue of guilt, responsibility, and ethical. How do you live your life ethically? And that determined very much my commitment in society and to society, I think. So, and that is also an explanation, because I never felt, also when I went from NGO to public or to private sector, I didn't have the impression that I betrayed my commitment, because it was not where I do it, but in the way how I exercise my job. So I studied law, I started in NGOs, I went to public, I came to France, I worked for public and private and NGO sector in France before joining L'Oréal in 2012. And the important thing is, I think, is not just that I was chief sustainability officer, but the important thing is also that I succeeded to put on the job on the right level of responsibility, and I was sitting on the C-suite of L'Oréal for the last 5 years. And that makes a huge difference, because if you want to have an impact, especially, on every issue, and that is a lesson for women in leadership position, and it is a lesson for chief sustainability officers, you have to be sitting at the table where decisions are made. Because otherwise, if you are, somewhere else, the decisions are made without you, and you do not have the same impact, influence, and power. So that was an important part, and I was able to combine at L'Oréal the transition to a business model, working on the transition to a business model operating within the planetary boundaries, together with all the societal impact, because I was also CEO of the L'Oréal Foundation and different philanthropical endeavors that we had started. I left L'Oréal in June 2024, and actually I'm presiding WWF France, so which means this is a non-executive mandate, which is very important, because also in the non-profit sector, we need very good governance structures. So I'm the president, and there is a CEO.
Okay.
I think. I'll stop it here and let you go on with the questions.
Anyway, we have the time to go through your experience, and I want to start with your experience at L'Oréal, because a lot of people listening to this podcast, are wondering how to change things, how to change the economic system, how to change the companies, because most people are aware also of the challenges that we face, as a civilization, as nations also, and of course, companies are making the systems, they are making some of the rules, and they should they try to lead by example, and they have a lot of questions. So I want to understand what were the big challenges, the biggest questions that you had to discuss, that you had to put forward, in that committee.
So I do not think that an executive committee in a multinational or international company is a place where you change the system. Honestly, I do not believe in that. And I think that would also be a little bit, I would question, if that would be not just, it's not the right place, but it is not possible, I think.
Okay.
And I do think that a company has a social mission, and the social mission of a company is to create value, economic value, and for me, in a way that is reducing or ideally totally limiting environmental impact and favoring positive societal impact. But I do not think, I think it's a little bit dreaming to say that one company can change the system. I do think, though, that the work that can be done in companies is extremely important. And the most important part is what you said in the end of your question, leading by example, because that's where you start to have a little bit of impact on the system. So I think the biggest, there are so many difficulties that I could talk a day about the difficulties for that kind of job. And I do want to express all my sympathy with people who are now in the moment chief sustainability officers in companies, because I think it was already hard when I did it, but that has nothing to do with what they are facing now in the moment, So really my sympathy, and it is not personal responsibility that things don't move on in the moment. It is, the world in which we live. So I want to deculpabilize. I don't know if you say that, deculpabiliser all the listeners who are in charge, because I think it's horribly difficult to make things move in a moment and within a company. Yeah?
So, but that's very interesting, because we hear a lot about the fact that change can come from within, and we can do a lot within the system as it is to become sustainable, even to become net zero. And some companies have objectives to become net zero. And we're going to talk about the current situation because it's currently changing. But just to understand, why do you think this is not the place where it can happen? What are the structural hurdles?
I think what you say is very true. It's the systemic and structural hurdles, So I think there are many things. So I think in 2017, after the Paris Agreement and everything, there was like the sustainability hype. Yes. It was a hype, Mm-hmm. I completely believe that, that collectively we will get there. So I'm very much in a different place in the moment, of course, in my thinking. But there was this hype, and there was a movement where you could feel that the expectations of consumers, the regulation, financial analysts and investors were all pushing or directing companies in a systemic transformation. Though I would say on the financial analysts and investors, a lot was bullshitting, because they had their sustainability teams who were looking if we were well ticking the boxes. And then there were the real people who were like...
the objective is still the profit and the shareholders, right?
Shareholders, margins, basis points, and so on. So there was a lot also of hypocrisy, but there was this collective story that we told each other, which had a great impact on the dynamics at that time. This is the
sense of history.
Exactly. It was like women's rights, I have worked a lot on women's rights very from the 90s on. And for me, in 2005, 2008, I was like, okay, this is the sense of history I do not need. Yeah, well, I was corrected, of course. And I think this is the same thing. So I think that is a really huge lesson for all people who are working on social or environmental activism. Nothing is ever gained. And I had to learn that the hard way, because twice in my career, I thought that it is done, this is the sense of history. And twice I experienced that actually, as soon as you let go down a little bit, the alertness, the back, the counterattack is coming in.
And what was these 2 moments?
The women's rights. So for me, it was, I had a huge aha experience. It was not. It was like an eureka moment with Me Too that really profoundly transformed me.
So that's it. Yeah,
because
it's
I was like, no, I've thought before. This is the sense of history. Women, especially coming from Austria and Germany, where women were less, coming to France. Okay, France, everybody said I'm not feminist, but that is something that you would not say at that time in Anglo-Saxon or German culture, but women were working, had power, and so on. So I thought, okay, this is the sense of history. I do not have to don't have to be alert at that point anymore. And Me Too was the total, really completely taking awareness of what we have gained, but we didn't take control of our bodies, and the liberty to live without violence and aggression. And I think I really was in denial about that before Me Too.
Okay.
And so Me Too liberated another feminist part in me, but also made me aware of how this is never that we have to always, always stay alert, always fighting, never bring down the intensity of our commitment in pursuing women's rights. And now I have the same experience with environmental, activism, because for me it was, that was even stronger, because it was not about conviction, it is about science, So I couldn't even imagine that we would go back on that point of, we had taken awareness, the planet will survive, it's about the human species, it's about how we are going to live. Science is very clear. There are no, it's not an opinion. Yeah. It's not an opinion. It is not about personal values. It is about science. So this total, that one part of the world and one part of society is capable to completely ignore and denied that, I was not, once again, I think, completely prepared on that.
So there was a point where you were very confident that you were, that this was happening, that this was, the progressive agenda on these topics was inevitably happening, and indeed this is what we're reading, and this is what basically to convince the company to move forward. It was about saying, guys, if you don't move forward, the rest of the industry will move forward. So you have to follow up. And this is a question of basic strategy or lowering the risk, because the consumer is moving in that direction. And so just to understand, what kind of topics were you putting into your strategy, and what was really moving forward in a company like L'Oréal? Where did you manage to get concrete improvements?
So I think what was was great, and where I am also a little bit proud of what we achieved is, well, first, if I go back to the ingredients of success, what looked like success at that time, and we will see where it gets now, because things are, of course, moving. But at that time, first of all, I never thought about sustainability as a technical issue. I really thought about sustainability as change management. And so I handled sustainability at L'Oréal like any other change. That was the first thing when I came to L'Oréal. I asked, what is the last change you have made, and how did you manage it, and what were the ingredients of success? And then, for example, I had a huge support of the CEO of that time, Jean-Paul Agon, who, for him, that was really the legacy he wanted to leave.
Okay.
So that is, of course, if you do not have that commitment, you can just save your energy for something else. Second, then the way I started it was, okay, at L'Oréal, things have to be beautiful. They have to be branded. So I did not at all the normal sustainability stuff, everything green, everything, not in the individual or branding codes. Everything I put in the codes of L'Oréal. So we started with commitments in 2012 that were commitments about improving ourselves. And the second important ingredient to the success...
Improving yourself, you mean improving what the company is doing?
Yeah, so reducing our carbon footprint, reducing our biodiversity footprint, improving our social footprint. And so we had
ambitious plan,
less ambitious than what came up later, because at that time it was a starting point. And at that time companies thought of, how do I improve the company, what I call myself, how do I improve the company from where I'm standing? So I want to do minus 50 on carbon emission, I want to do minus 30 on water and so on. And so we did that, but I decided something that was really, I think, impacting a lot, that each and every person who was working on product development had to question himself or herself how to improve the product regarding the environmental footprint. And that is a change, because you have to get to the core of the business. If you do not work on the product and services that the company sells, then you're outside. And when you're outside, you cannot move change like you need to move it. And so we developed a tool. In the beginning, it was an Excel sheet, So this is the environmental footprint of a product, it's the ingredients, it's the packaging, it's the consumer use, and so on. And then we developed with scientists a very serious tool that was called Sustainable Product Improvement Tool. And from there on, there was a level, people gained a new level of understanding of what sustainability means when they do their job. And the interesting thing is, of course, you can say we just improved incrementally. It was improvements, like minus 5, minus 10. But that prepared the company for that in 2020, we were able to announce a transition plan to do business in a way that is aligned with the planetary boundaries. Because that was the big move, was to not anymore think, how can I improve what I do as a company, but how can I do what the world needs from me? And that is a whole other thinking, because there we were not anymore about 50% or 60 or 80% of our carbon emissions, scope 1 and 2, but we were about scope 3 in carbon emissions, in everything we do, much more radical. And there, that differentiates us from other companies that was maturity related, because we started earlier, because we had a very committed CEO, because we have a lot of, we are a long-term company, more than 120 years with 5 CEOs. So long-term means something, because we had the support of the shareholders, and because I had a very systemic vision. So we were able to put this plan into place that is very, perhaps too ambitious, but L'Oréal was able to put that in place. And I think to think not anymore about what can I do to improve from where I stand, but what can I do, what the world needs, how can I do what the world needs from me? And that means living, also as a company aligned with the planetary boundaries. And so that, I think, I tell you more about, I can talk you about the failures and the difficulties later, but here to talk about achievements. And that was possible because each and every person, or a lot more, the majority of people at L'Oréal have been confronted to the sustainability issue, understood what it meant to...
why we were doing this. Yeah.
Exactly. Why we were doing it, but also how it needs to be done,
Peut-être non, mais on peut le mettre là, sinon c'est pas de problème.
Voilà. So I think that is really important, that preparation. And of course, there was a society that was moving. Sustainability was everywhere, in regulation, in consumer expectations, into investors' discussion. And L'Oréal is also a company that likes to do the right thing, because I think that is also important, and that made it also easier. So that were the positive ingredients, I think. The leadership, clear vision, change management aligned with the company code, and really make it understand to everybody.
So you managed to have very concrete results when it comes to changing the packaging, to how much water you use, etc. I don't have the figures. I don't know if we need to go into the figures, but things moved because people on the field understood why they were asked to do that. And I suppose also because the objectives that you had were not colliding too much with the business objectives. And this is my other questions, where did it collide? And when did you start having, very tough conversations? Because at some point you need to make choices between, okay, do we prioritize our savings or all the efforts that we do related to your topics, or do we prioritize market share or profit?
So I think, and that's exactly why I believe that this is not the place to change the system where you are getting. So we had extremely good results. We were every year evaluated by all sustainability analysts as one of the most performing companies in sustainability. But that is also because we were very radical in our understanding. And we are all living in an economy of wastage. There are so many things you can do to improve your environmental footprint, which just consists in not wasting resources, energy, and so on. I think where it is very clear that this is not going to happen is because the system is not ready, is where you have to make choices between profits and sustainability.
So, because to understand, there is a margin that's quite easy to address for most companies, which is stop wasting things, because also it's a waste of money also at some point even.
Exactly.
But when you get to the point where, okay, we've done all that, but now we need to make a choice on business model, on maybe selling less products or losing market share, this is where you have the tough conversations.
It's not just a tough conversation. I don't see how it can be done today. I think we had these conversations. We stopped our product lines. We had that conversation. I think I was very privileged because that was before all this. Shit was happening.
We get back to this in a few minutes.
So I think we had that conversation. I know that I heard the CEO say, between what this product adds as value and the environmental impact it has, my choice is going to privilege environmental. I don't know. I think that there are a lot of companies who have this kind of conversations because there is a maturity necessary that develops over time. So if you haven't started early, and if you just have started like a year or two before all this anti-transition conversation has happened, I think today that conversation will be difficult to have because it needs maturity. And maturity needs time. People need the time.
And a certain relationship with shareholders, a relationship with the board, etc.
So we were able to have that conversation, but I'm not sure that everybody can have that conversation. But then, at one point you cannot have a conversation about I'll accept to have a less good economic or financial performance, because then you're just out of the game. And when you are out of the game, the only thing will happen that you will lose employment, you will lose jobs. Basically, the CEO is going to get fired and replaced by somebody else. We have seen that a lot. And that's why I say the system is not ready. And that's why I say you cannot say a company has the responsibility to do that, because that just means that the company is out.
It doesn't make the rules, right?
Yeah, the company does not make the rule. It's a system that is interacting. But for example, what you can do is what L'Oréal did was also to work on the sustainable product optimization tool, which I talked about. We started to share it with our competitors, and today there is a tool of showing your environmental performance on your products. Being able to compare it, that is in place. And that was because everybody came together and said, if we want to change the system, we will have to do this together. Is this going to be sufficiently now promoted, accepted, desired by the consumers and stakeholders? Not for the moment. But in the end, the sense of history is still going to be that one, because there is no other possibility.
At what point did you realize that it was not going to happen within, the type of cooperation, and that you had reached the kind of the limit of what can be done? Was there something that happened,
moment?
Or was it progressive?
No, I think it was progressive. I don't know. I had my aha moment was more personal and on leadership issues and on where the world is going and where is my place in this evolution of the world. But it was more progressive that I think when I started to feel that the resistance is going to be so powerful that there is going to be a major backlash that will take some years and some time. And then, of course, that things are going to come back, But that I was not capable and I had not the energy to accompany these phases of sustainability. Unfortunately, our chief sustainability officer became a little bit, controlling through the European regulation. That's not where I'm good at, and I'm not interested in your box ticking. That was not the kind of job.
Even though you have a legal background, no?
That was not. I never worked as a lawyer for that reason exactly. So I think and that's also. I think there is also a really obvious contradiction there that chief sustainability officer, sustainability leaders have to be visionary. And what is asked today in reporting and regulation is actually very much the contrary of visionary. This is really auditing and contrôle de gestion. I forgot how to say that. Internal controller, and filling out formulas, And I think here is a contradiction also that weakens, unfortunately, sustainability leaders, because they do not have any more visionary conversations with their CEOs. Okay. They have conversations about
regulations.
Did we respond to the regulation? Where is our report? Where are our data points? Do we have all the data points we need? And so on. So probably, and perhaps this is going to inspire something else, but this phase of transition, I think in the moment, chief sustainability officers are really in a hard place. Okay,
so it's kind of it's a good idea on the paper, but when it's the way it's implemented now, is not good, or it's a necessary transition. You think?
I don't know that.
You don't know.
I do not have my opinion, completely. I think, unfortunately, everything is in nuance, so that makes, so we need much more time to explain it. I think the good thing about regulation is that we have to recall that companies were not committing to all they needed to commit to before the regulation, because they didn't look into the data, they didn't fix targets. We know since 1972 where the resources are going to be limited, and companies haven't done the job. So regulation was necessary, I think, and companies should stop to complain, because if they would have done what was necessary, they wouldn't have that amount of regulation. Second, I think the way regulation is done is, for me, I was always defender of results and not the means to get there. So now we have a lot of means how to get to the result, but very little obligation of results. So I think we should have more obligation of results according to a company needs to do this and that. And then on the other side, I think what also happens, and there I'm going into more philosophical and societal question, is that a society that has just law as a vision is a society that has insufficiently vision for the future. And I think as we do not have the leaders we need, we have a lot of people who go to the law as a form of support, of help to translate something, when we would need at the same time much more visionary leaders who were able to lead the people and the countries to another system and another vision of society. So I think I am very nuanced on that issue. On the one side, we needed it. On the other side, it is definitely not going to help us to have the necessary vision that.
So you were talking about a more personal aha moment.
Yeah.
I want to understand, what decided you to move on and to go to another place, and then we can talk about this.
So that was a long process. Well, I think first of all, I was 12 years at L'Oréal. It's not like I divorced after 2 years. So it's a long time, 12 years. And at 12 years, if you're somebody who likes to continue to evolve, I think that is already a very long time. I think for me, when I started to be in the executive committee, it was the same time that started like really major crisis all the time. It's much more about crisis management than it was in the years 90, 2000 and so on, where people were confronted to challenges and crises they were used to. But there was Me Too, but afterwards there was the COVID, Black Lives Matters, the invasion of Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and so on. So I was confronted daily with major societal issues, some of them really personally impacting me. During the Black Lives Matters, that was really a very transformational moment for me. I was very personally impacted by Black Lives Matters because my children are mixed race children.
Okay.
So I had on my Twitter account, I put messages that were clearly in solidarity with Black Lives Matters movement. And at one point, L'Oréal was asked to express themselves on the whitening products, because L'Oréal had products where there was written a whitening or this kind of words. So we have to make clear that whitening products are not products that make the skin clearer, but that this is a communication that some countries and women in Asia, for example, really, really appreciate because it's about their beauty ideal. In African and Afro-American society, it's much more complicated because, first of all, in Africa, there are a lot of illegal products that are sold that have a health impact, of course, not L'Oréal products. And also because it was very much communicating a vision of society about being white is more inspiration and so on. So L'Oréal at that point decided to take off their packaging, whitening and white. And that was, I remember that like it was yesterday, it was the day before an election. It was no media news. And somehow it came in the media and the interpretation was not that we try to respect everybody and not to hurt people by the way L'Oréal expresses its slogan, but the interpretation was L'Oréal has become crazy, woke, they take off white and whitening of all their packaging, white has lost the right to exist anymore. And that was a huge, that was in all the news all around Europe. This was crazy, completely out of hand.
The beginning of a reaction that came to what we have now.
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly. And then I got personally attacked very much because I was one of the few responsible people at L'Oréal who had a Twitter account, who was very vocal about sustainability, women's rights, and this kind of issues. So I got personally on 48 hours was like, I'm the most horrible
target. Yeah,
very much targeted by the extreme right wing. And that started to ask for me like 100,000 questions of where society goes, where I want to go as a leader, how free I want to be to express what I think, because of course your personal opinions should not impact negatively the company and so on. So there were hundreds of thousands of questions that started at that point. I wrote then a book about corporate activism, and I started to think in that book about what I think about being a leader in the 21st century, what that needs from personal character and ethical vision on society. And so it was great for me, thank you, because it started a whole new phase of my life where I took it to, I think, to a next level, my thinking and my leadership skills also.
Okay, so it was very much personal process that led you to, and that was a good timing also for you, as you said, because I guess it was the end of a phase
exactly.
also. So can you tell me about what happened next, and how did you end up, with doing what you do today?
Yeah, so I started a thesis. I started a thesis at executive thesis at USCP with a philosophy professor, and I started to work on leadership, and more than just leadership, because everybody talks about the technical skills for leadership, and you have to know how to give feedback and how. But I want to know a leader's character. What is needed in a world that is so much in transformation, that is so much in crisis, that will ask for so many courageous and difficult choices. So, what is necessary as a leader's character? And I started my thesis actually on the notion of decency. Okay. Because la décence, indecency are words that we use a lot in France. The behavior, for example, CEOs who pay themselves like 400 times or 4,000 times what earn their employees, that is very much often called indecent. So it's a lot. There are a lot of. So I started to interrogate that term of decency, and actually there is only one theorist, author, who wrote a lot about that. He called that common decency. Okay. A common decency, that's George Orwell. And George Orwell was himself more from an upper class, but he was very attracted to the working class, and he went to study the living conditions and the interactions. So he very consciously abandoned his original social background to interrogate the surroundings. And he came up and he said, the people are poor, the miners in England, in France, these are poor people, but they share something that is common decency. And that common decency expresses itself in a form of mutual respect, of solidarity, in form of integrity that you cannot have when you are privileged, because you do not understand the conditions of living of the poorer people. He was not a philosopher, he was a writer, so he never completely theorized his concept, but you can find it a lot in his writing. So it was not, it's like the first step of what can be the minimum necessary of ethical behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I came then from there, I came to as opposite hubristic behavior. So we have so many examples. You cannot describe it better than just look to the news every day. What is hubristic behavior? And it's a psychopathology. It's a form of a malady, a disease. So it is not normal to behave like that.
But that leads to power in a lot of cases also sometimes.
But it also leads to destruction. It's just a question of time. So this is never, it started with Icar et Daedalus and Icarus, you might say in English. So of course it's going to fail, but we will all pay a very high price and to assist to that. But then I came to hubris, and then I came to virtue ethics in the sense of Aristoteles, because there are some virtues. We talked so much about skills and competences and leadership, and so little about virtues, that as a leader, and especially in the changes we have to lead in the 21st century, you have to have a certain number of virtues and display them. And I think that is also really related to the fact that we were too afraid to have the value conversation, because saying, values can be culturally different and depends, moral recalls religion, but virtues are something that are a common sense of virtues are shared by all cultures. If you look into Confucius, if you look into Ubuntu in Africa, if you look into Aristoteles, here there are virtues such as respect, humility, serving something bigger than yourself, big lack in society nowadays, honesty, temperance, being in the right middle. That are virtues that are valued in all cultures. And we do not at all judge our leaders by this kind of virtues. We do not talk about it, neither in education, in management education, neither in companies. And so that is what I'm passionate about now. How can you teach that? How can you share that?
That's very interesting, because in companies, there is, especially in big groups, there is time spent in talking about good ways to manage people, being empathetic, some virtues, or this is our values. But what I noticed from my own experience is that often it clashes with the structural objectives of the companies, and a lot of people are suffering from that conflicting, things. Like on the one hand, you can be told, and it's not the case in every company, because in some companies it's fine, to be very, very tough with one another and to be competing. But in some places, we are being told that you need to be a good leader, you need to take care of other people. But sometimes when structurally it's not possible, because then you get to put pressure on people. So I want to have your point of view on. Because I see you put a lot of thought into this, but on the structures of the companies, or the way the market works, or the economy works, or even politics, that make this type of leader emerge and come to the top too often, and what prevents in the end change, from happening when it comes to who is in charge.
Yeah, so I think we have pushed the system so far, So I think people suffer from a form of cognitive dissonance, and that's true, and they are right to suffer from it, And I think that is also something about personal alignment that people cannot do anymore, because on the one hand, you say that is bad. On the other hand, and that's a huge mistake that we made also, I think, as environmental leaders, as ecologists, and so on, that we had not always the same expectations on ourselves, on our leaders, then the same rules have to apply to everybody, And I think this is really important, that there is a lack of authenticity you are talking about, a lack of coherence. And incoherence is one of the things people suffer most from in companies and in societies. I have been recently to Africa for a study on my research, and a lot of young people said, that they do not reject some of the leaders. I reject completely, because they say, at least I know he's going to do what he says, and he is coherent, and that is kind of a relief, because it secures me. And I think that is really important, that the incoherence of our leadership also led to what is happening, because you have the same rules, it's like with the conversation about equality, You cannot just talk about equality. Formal equality is not real equality. And when you have inequality everywhere, but you say we are the most equal, we have the most equal vision, that creates a cognitive dissonance that is not possible. We expect exemplary behavior, and all the people who represent us do not have exemplary behavior. So that creates, I think, incoherence is one of the diseases of our societies and companies, and that people have a lot of difficulty to handle that. And then they say, okay, if it's already like this, I can also go to the worst. Yeah. And that's a little bit what is happening. And I think companies need really to be very, very careful, and leadership has to be very careful, to have that alignment. I think in companies, many things led to what you point out as difficulties. But there is also that we looked at ethics as a very rules and process-driven process, and that we do not expect from people to have personally a virtuous behavior, because we think that is a personal choice. And I think there is something that transformed in the appreciation of people that is not good, that a form of, call it moral, call it values, virtues, is not part of the conversation, of the leadership. So leadership, the character of leaders matters. And that is a conversation that we only have when it's very negative, and we do not have when we talk about education, management education, business schools. In the whole world, there are like 10 schools, business schools, who work on that issue. Can you imagine that? For something so important. And in the moment, I have seen that in practice, that at one point, when we are in such difficult situations as we are now, everything comes down to who you want to be as a person, and when you're on a deathbed, how are you going to look back on who you have been?
Mm-hmm. And beyond that individual work, that can be done by everyone, and that should be done at some point, and we can educate people to do that as early as possible. But is there an idea that you have about how organizations operate structurally, that could be on what to change in the process, in the way you promote people, in the objectives that we set, that could really accelerate things and move things into the right direction? Because even when you have individuals that work on themselves, that are aware of these issues in big companies, you face a lot of barriers related to how simply things work. I understand that there are a lot of limitations related to the way the economy works, but do you have ideas on what people that are listening to us, can do within their organization to address some structural hurdles?
Yeah, so I think there is a virtue of courage. Okay. And courage is a muscle that you develop, and that is terribly absent in the most companies, So people, they think very often, this is expected from me, and so I'm going to deliver this. But there is always a space for asking uncomfortable question, because nobody's going to fire you for an uncomfortable question. People are going to think, okay, once again, an uncomfortable question, but this is going to make its way. So I think the most important thing, one of the most important quality virtues we have to develop, but also culture in companies, is courage. And that does, in the worst case, or in the most, that goes to refuse to implement something that you consider unethical. But the way to such an extreme, there are many, many micro decisions that have been taken before. And this, I often say, because very often people ask me, what can I do? And I think especially young people also ask me that very often when I was at L'Oréal. And I say, yes, you are not sitting yet at the decision-making table, but the question, courage is a muscle. And first you to do it once, you see nothing will happen, you will continue to do it, you will continue to develop it. And that is going to be a game changer. Because when people ask themselves questions, or ask questions, the spectrum of possibilities gets so much wider that the system can transform. But without that everyday courage, where everybody just thinks, I want to please my manager because I want to have a good performance evaluation, because that's the way it is, and we have always done it like this, and we will always do it like this. That is the worst thing. And I think the managers that do not allow courage are really the worst managers and should be very strongly penalized, because this is the most important thing today, that people are capable of developing that muscle of courage, and we need more courageous people.
Well, a lot to unpack here. Can we talk about what you do at WWF and how did you get there?
Yeah, so when I decided to leave L'Oréal, I decided to work on my thesis, to open a bookshop, and to have a commitment, of course, to pursue my impact on society. And WWF asked me to join as a president of WWF France, and I happily accepted. Because it is an organization that I think is very interesting in positioning. So first of all, of course, WWF, you all know what it is doing, ecosystem protection and preservation and species protection. And so first, I think that the conversation about nature and biodiversity is a very interesting conversation because it is one of the planetary boundaries that is local. It's not just global. You know, the problem with climate change and the story, and to make it appealing to people, is that it is global and that your personal impact on climate change seems to be a limited one. You know, it's you're so small. We are all so small. You know, even a big company like L'Oréal or LVMH, or everybody is small. Biodiversity and water are local issues, you know, local planetary boundaries. So you can impact, you can do, you can transform. So I think that the conversation about nature might perhaps bring to the table the necessary change in narrative also that we need, so that people re-engage on the transition. And I love the whole philosophical conversation about the relationship with the living, la relation avec le vivant, and, you know, the separation between culture and nature, the relationship of women and nature. So there are hundreds of things that I think intellectually, really very, very interesting. But there is also this very practical aspect of biodiversity we can have and local impact, and perhaps we can engage people in that conversation easier. And that's the reason why I was very happy to accept, but also because WWF is an apolitical structure. And as long as I have very, very strong convictions and opinions, I do not want to contribute to the écume du jour. I do not want to add to the daily conversations about one said this and one said that. That is not the thing I am interested in. And I think this apolitical positioning of WWF are partisan because it's very relevant for me, because it allows to have a stronger impact in the moment, I think.
We get back to that if you have a little bit of time. But I want to have your point of view on that, what's happening right now, the fact that the tension is very, very high because of what's happening in part in the US. And you can see all the backlashes, you know, from the progressive movements that we mentioned earlier, and that you noticed at L'Oréal, now is happening very, very heavily everywhere. So what's your take, or what do you understand from what's going on with in the US with the Trump administration trying to kind of erase science, and what is the impact that you're starting to see from what you know at NGOs or organizations? So
that's something that happened after I left L'Oréal. At L'Oréal, there was no going down of commitments or anything as long as I was there. But I think what I think is important is that what people haven't understood, and it's normal, you know, when you have, this is like the Renaissance, Middle Age Renaissance. This is like, you know, end of Roman Empire. This is like, this is a huge, huge moment in human history. There are some people who have understood that it's not ideology or humans that are going to write history anymore. It's nature that is going to write our history. And that is a huge change, because there are people who are so uneducated people who still think it's their ideology who will create reality and who will write history and who will write the history, the story of people today. That is wrong. This is the major change, civilizational change. La nature a pris la main. Jean Viard has written all a book about that. So nature has taken over. And people do not understand that yet.
Yeah, because we're starting just to see the...
Exactly.
On, yeah.
But so now it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it will have an impact on our individual and personal destinies. It will have an impact on the destiny of our nations, of our countries, cities. It will have an impact on every dimension of private and public life. That is by a large part of society not yet understood, and is going to come in the next years. So I think there is something which is, and when you look into the acceleration of history, like Hartmut Rosa has talking about it, this is going to be rapid because reality is going to, to take over. Mm-hmm. Nature is going to take over. You don't negotiate with nature. You don't negotiate with science. This is just facts. And so I think it is an acceleration of a form of breakdown, because the American dream has become the American nightmare. So is this, we will see it, when we look back, is this good that accelerated the end of a certain model, or is that bad? I don't know. We will see. But for me, it is very clear that model cannot survive,
Mm-hmm. And how do you, now that you work for an NGO, in part you do many other things, because you're still writing your thesis, right? It's a long-term process.
My thesis, yes, and I do different, yes, and I have my bookshop. And everything.
How do you articulate, the roles that can play to integrate all these changes that you were mentioning, and the fact that we're going to have to build more resilience, and that also what can be done is limited because we have all these structures. How do you articulate the role of companies versus NGOs versus building common goods versus institutions? Do you start to have a point of view on where it's more relevant to be pushing?
Yeah, but you asked the president of WWF, so I think, of course, it's very relevant to push on biodiversity, on preservation, restoration, protection of nature. I do think, but I would like, because that's, I can talk about 100 technical details, but that's not interesting. I just think, I have started with a group of people to think about what will be the narratives. How can we rewrite the story that people really understand, adhere, and commit to the necessary transition? So we are working on that, and we receive different people and experts to discuss with us. And the last one was a psychotherapist and psychologist researching on eco-anxiety. And eco-anxiety is a bad word, because anxiety refers to something that is not reasonable, to a form of pathology. And being afraid today is very reasonable when we look at environmental changes. But the most important thing is when you ask what will help people to manage their fear about what is going to come, is to create commons, to create common ground, to allow these people to integrate a collective of where they can act, where they have agency, to interact with other people. And so I think, and that is valid for many, many issues we are looking at in society in the moment, is we have to create common ground. We have to be able to cooperate. We have to relearn how to interact, to work together, to define a common objective and get to that. So that is the reason why I think it's extremely important that we do not, and that, for example, is something that the WWF does, cooperating, discussing with everybody, discussing with companies, having cooperations in order to change. So I think as a method, it is really the thing to create collective common ground and to cooperate, which is a huge, huge priority. because otherwise this is not going to work. It's not going to work if companies do their things and NGOs, experts do their thing and governments do their things. We will have to find, and that is also what is interesting about biodiversity, as it's local, it can be on a smaller ladder, and that allows to be much more efficient and transformational. So a lot of belief in the local.
Yeah. It's more about not trying to address, problems that are too big for us, because it can be also difficult, where to start, like big systemic things. And a lot of people are saying, okay, we start with where you are in the territory and take care of your community, your local community. And basically, if everybody does it, we start to have something interesting.
Yeah, but you have written recently that Chidi Vance said a healthy person is first worrying about themselves, about their community, and about humanity. Yes. So I don't want to say that.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point. How do you articulate that?
Yeah, we have to articulate that. So I think first, I think it was Louise Michel who said, my home is humanity, and I think that is very important to recall that to see everybody as a human being, to have that empathy, even in the people who we consider as enemies or opponents, that first and foremost, it's a human. And then I think that just you can think about global problems, but everything that leads to inaction should be avoided. So when you just think about global solutions, which are too complex to put in place, that it might bring the thinking further, and we should do it. When I talk about virtue education, I know that this is not going to happen tomorrow in all over the world, but I think it is important to bring it forward. But then you can work on a local, regional, national, to bring things forward, each and everyone on his scale. And as we are all small in this is a huge question of, during COVID, I worked with a lot of social organizations. And the interesting thing is, and I live also in a very popular area, and people said, yeah, basically that's not so bad, because for once we are all equal in front of COVID. This is going to happen with nature taking over. We are going to be all equal, confronted to. Solutions might be, but the first experience of that change, of course, people who have more money, who are more privileged, will find solutions of air conditioning and so on. But the experience of nature taking over is going to be a shared experience.
What do you think of the word sustainability? Because shouldn't we talk more also about resilience and robustness? And because sometimes it feels to me that it has become a little bit empty. Because we know that the way the economy works today won't allow us to make it sustainable, but we don't know what could replace it. So this is also not helping us. Yeah,
I think there is a huge work on words necessary. I think ecology does not speak to the general public. We see it. Nature speaks more. Forest. Personal experience. So I think we have, and that is something that I really also think is important. All the people, all the ecologists, all people working on social change and so on, we also have to reflect on how we were talking to people, in which way, how we communicated, how we made them feel about themselves. And I think there is something where we have work to do in order to do better in the future. Everybody has to do his or her work in this.
Yeah, especially as that you see now that a lot of people are worried about the short-term economical situation, inflation. In the US, it was a big thing of the campaign. And it's very difficult, especially with social media bubbles, to understand, why we should think about longer term and why these things matter. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, social media, and you know it better than me, it's transforming the way our brain works, and especially, so yes, there is always short-term compensation, short-term vision. So there is a lot of work to be done, which a lot of people do, though, because they feel that's not good for their kids and so on. But there is some more work necessary in order to reintroduce letting your brain develop all its capacities.
I have a few quick-fire round questions. What would you say is the most underrated sustainability solution? You know, like something, even if I don't like the word sustainability, you know, something that you have seen that should really be pushed forward, that works in your field?
That's a good question. I think what is underrated as I think the awareness of companies about the importance of sustainable value chains. That meaning what today companies do not understand, but what they can and should understand even in the short-term interest as value chains. You know, how are you going to get your raw material? And if you do not work on long-term availability in a sustainable way, in an environmental respectful way, your business model is not going to be resilient. You're going to disappear. And companies do not understand that in the moment, I have the impression. And
they should start to understand, because we're talking a lot about resources.
Yeah, exactly, because they already feel
there,
prices, there are price of cacao and other, going up like crazy. But that is where I'm like, guys, this is incredible that you do not get that, in your own interest, even in your own existing model, that is like the basic.
This is not coming back.
How do I get my raw materials, And they don't understand that. That's strange.
Most overrated sustainability trend or, fake solution?
No, it's not a fake solution, but I'm ambivalent about this. All the things that you want to say, you want to feel guilty citizens, So my biggest pain point is the thing about taking the plane, because I think that there is a question of societies getting too closed and too concentrated, and individuals looking, missing the openness to the world, to other societies, to other cultures, that to create common ground that should be more than just on a nation level. I think that is really
it's counterproductive.
Counterproductive, and when you experience yourself of how it opens your mind, and your perspective and the respect for other people and other cultures. I think this kind of guilt, I'm not playing on this, though I acknowledge that, of course, but I prefer that people are less. We know that, digital is going to take over in carbon emissions regarding the environmental footprint of...
So less AI.
Less. Stop using your cell phones. But that is, of course, I acknowledge the environmental impact of that, but I'm really ambivalent about this one.
And if you extrapolate, that could be related to the way we try to convince people and the way we approach the strategy to convince people by blaming. You think it's something that doesn't work?
No, I think we should definitely stop that, because as we see, that does not work. That does not work.
One book everyone should read in their life.
So there I have, I'm very sorry, but if you get me started on that one, that is really very important for me. So I'll choose one. So, first, of course, there is Nicomachean Ethics of Aristoteles, but there is something, there was recently one I really loved, the Suleiman Bashir Dian, who is about why we still should aspire to universalism, but not universalism hegemonique, not a dominant universalism like was the reality after Enlightenment, but a balanced universalism that should be universalism in the sense of the humanity of each and every one of us. So that is a recent one because, I have a bookshop because I like to read, so I can say so I have to choose.
What gives you hope for the future and the next years?
That, in this kind of situation, that's like in 38 or 33, I'm always going back to my origins. You have to see the worst coming out of people, but you also see the best coming out of people, In the moment you have people who, surprise you by their alignment, their courage, their capacity to stick to their values and convictions, and to make it in a way that is, respectful and considering the humanity of each and everyone as the most important thing. So, the worst, and that's the hard thing about this time, but also le juste, the best, and that the best gives, of course, a lot of hope.
Yeah, a lot of things also is happening that we don't see and we don't talk about, I guess.
Exactly.
Thanks a lot for your time and for your insights, Alexandra.
Thank you.